Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a topic absolutely fundamental to our understanding of health and medicine, the integrity of randomized clinical trials, or RCTs.
Right. These trials are, the bedrock of evidence-based healthcare.
Exactly. But how solid is that bedrock, really? That's what we're digging into. To guide us, we're using a comprehensive source, a scoping umbrella review published back in 2023. It was in the International Journal of Gynecology and Obstetrics.
And an umbrella review is basically, well, it reviews other reviews.
Yeah, pulls together findings from a huge amount of research. This one zeroes in specifically on research integrity within RCTs.
Yeah.
There's this growing sense out there, and it's echoed in this review, of a crisis of confidence in how trustworthy RCTs are.
A definite unease, yeah.
So our mission in this deep dive is really to unpack what this massive review found about why that confidence might be shaky,
Yep.
where are the problems showing up, and, what does it all mean for the health information you and I rely on every day?
And what's really striking here is just the scale this single review managed to tackle. It synthesized findings from 55 other systematic reviews.
55. Wow.
Yeah, and those covered over like 6,000 individual studies conducted all the way back from 1964 up to 2021.
Okay, so that's a huge time frame. It gives us an incredibly broad lens then.
It really does.
Yeah.
A broad view on where integrity issues have been cropping up across the entire lifespan of a clinical trial. So let's maybe jump into one of the review's most striking initial findings.
Let's do it.
They looked at those 55 systematic reviews, the ones summarizing all the evidence, and found that the quality of these reviews themselves was, well, overwhelmingly low.
Low quality. How low are we talking?
Using a modified assessment tool, a staggering 96% of the 55 reviews were rated as critically low quality.
96%. Okay, hold on. Critically low quality. That's
Yeah.
a massive red flag right at the start. What does that actually mean in this context? What were the weaknesses?
Well, it points to really fundamental gaps in how these reviews were done and reported. Things that make it hard to, trust their synthesis of the evidence.
Like what specifically?
Okay, so for example, many didn't provide a list of the studies they excluded.
Ah, okay. So you don't know what they left out.
Exactly. How can you assess a summary if you don't know what evidence was left on the cutting room floor? And there were issues describing funding sources for the studies they did include.
Right. Funding is always key.
Definitely. Plus, how conflicts of interest were handled, problems with how studies were selected. And get this, only 27% even reported prospective registration.
Meaning they didn't register their plan before they started the review?
Right, which is, pretty key for transparency.
Yeah.
To prevent shifting the goalposts later.
So, wait, they didn't even list excluded studies or fully describe funding. That feels like trying to build a wall when half the bricks are hidden and you don't know who paid for the rest.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
So this isn't just like academic nitpicking. This low quality in the reviews means the very summaries we rely on are built on shaky ground.
Which raises that important question. If the evidence synthesis is weak, how much confidence can you really have in the conclusions being drawn?
Precisely. It's sort of the first layer of the integrity problem this umbrella review uncovered.
Right. Okay, so that's a huge issue with the reviews themselves. But wading through all that patchy data, what did the umbrella review still manage to find about integrity issues within the actual RCTs, the trials themselves?
Yeah. Despite the limitations of the source reviews, they did consistently identify a wide range of problems within the trials they analyzed.
Okay.
And the umbrella review did a nice job organizing these issues sort of chronologically across the various stages of an RCT's life cycle.
How did they break that down?
Well, they found issues in sort of general aspects of the trials, then during the design and approval phase, throughout the conduct and monitoring, big problems in reporting protocols and results, even post-publication concerns. And it also highlighted gaps for future research.
That covers pretty much everything. Among all those categories, did any specific types of problems stand out as the most common culprits?
Absolutely. The umbrella review specifically flagged two issues that kept coming up as primary concerns across those 55 reviews.
Yeah.
Ethics and transparency.
Ethics and transparency.
Okay. Yeah, each showed up as a major problem area in 18% of the reviews it synthesized. So pretty significant chunks.
Okay, let's dive into ethics first then. Where are the major integrity gaps showing up there, according to the review?
Ethics comes up again and again. A really big one is informed consent processes.
How so?
Reviews found that participants often don't fully understand key concepts of the trial they're joining. Things like what a placebo is, how randomization works.
The very basics of the trial design.
Exactly. Or the potential risks and side effects involved. There's even debate, apparently, about whether simplified consent forms are ethically okay, even for low-risk trials.
That's tricky.
And consent for using patient data is another complex area flagged. When trials use passively collected data or data from biobanks.
Right, data that's already there.
Yeah, the methods for getting consent are often inadequate, and there's just no real consensus on who owns that data or how it should be secured.
Wow.
Plus, the ethical review processes themselves. They lack consensus on quality criteria internationally.
So the very foundation, making sure people understand what they're signing up for, how their data is used, has serious widespread issues according to these reviews.
It seems so, and that connects directly back to historical examples, like the Tuskegee study, which the source mentions.
A stark reminder of how catastrophically consent can fail.
Absolutely. And even then, early unethical findings weren't formally retracted. The source also notes ethical issues can be field-specific, like resource allocation in pediatric oncology, or challenges during COVID-19.
Okay, so ethics is clearly a major recurring theme. What about the other big one, transparency? You said that was just as common.
Yes, and here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Transparency issues are highlighted as rampant.
Why is transparency so fundamentally crucial in clinical trials? I mean, it seems obvious, but maybe spell it out.
Well, because without adequate transparency, you simply can't verify the results independently. You can't fully understand the methods used, and you can't spot potential influences or biases that might skew the findings.
Makes sense.
And the review found massive gaps here, especially when trials get to the reporting stage. It seemed like about 38% of the reviews focusing on reporting mentioned transparency issues.
Okay, give us some examples. What kind of transparency problems are we seeing?
So something as fundamental as how they decided on the number of participants, the sample size calculation, often incomplete, particularly noted in pain relief trials.
Why does that matter?
Well, it's hard to trust a trial's result if you don't know if it was even designed to have enough statistical power to find a meaningful difference in the first place.
Good point. Okay, what else?
Poor endorsement of open access data sharing, especially in surgical research, apparently.
Meaning the raw data isn't available for others to check.
Exactly. If the data isn't shared, independent researchers can't reanalyze it or verify the findings. It stays in a black box. Authorship disclosure is often incomplete. One review found crucial details missing in 99% of publications.
99%, what kind of details?
Things like specific contributions of each author or their affiliations, which might indicate potential conflicts of interest. Imagine not fully knowing who actually did the work or influenced the paper you're relying on.
That's concerning.
It really is. Even data visualization can be misleading, like using bar graphs for small continuous data sets.
Why is that a problem? Bar graphs seem common.
They are, but for continuous data, with just a few data points, R graphs can hide the actual distribution and variability. They can make results look much cleaner or more significant than they actually are compared to, say, a scatter plot.
Ah, I see. Subtle manipulation, almost.
It can be, intentionally or not. Then there's selective reporting of outcomes, only highlighting the findings that look good, maybe ignoring others, often linked to focusing on preferred findings or just poor initial design.
Cherry-picking results.
Basically. And even details about data monitoring committees, DMCs, or data and safety monitoring boards, DSMBs.
Those are the independent groups that watch over the trial while it's running, right? For safety.
Exactly. Crucial for safety and integrity. They can recommend stopping a trial early if needed. But information about them, who was on them, what they looked at, was often missing or deficient in the final publications.
So basic information, stuff you'd think is essential to judge a study's trustworthiness, is just consistently not being reported.
That's what these reviews seem to be finding time and time again. Even things like ethnicity data collection and reporting in multinational trials are often suboptimal.
Wow. And the source also touches on outright misconduct, right? Not just poor practice, but deliberate actions.
Yes, it does. While systematic detection methods are reasonably established for plagiarism,
Okay.
the tools for spotting other forms of misconduct, like data fabrication or falsification, are described by the review as, quote, rudimentary and labor-intensive.
Harder to catch, though.
Much harder. And sadly, the source notes that the intense pressure to publish, often tied to job promotion and getting grants.
The publish-or-perish culture.
Exactly. It contributes to both these questionable research practices and outright plagiarism.
This raises an important question. Speaking of pressures, how does funding influence results? You mentioned issues reporting it earlier.
Right, well, this is a well-documented issue across medicine, and the reviews included in this umbrella review really reinforced it.
What did they find?
They consistently found that industry-funded studies are significantly more likely to report conclusions favorable to the intervention produced by the funder.
Significantly more likely. How much more?
The source mentions risk ratios and odds ratios. Basically, the numbers suggest these industry-funded studies could be anywhere from, say, 3 to maybe 5 times more likely to report positive outcomes compared to trials funded independently.
3 to 5 times. Wow. That's a substantial potential bias baked right into the evidence base we rely on.
It really is. It's a huge factor to consider when you're looking at trial results.
Okay. And what happens when integrity fails so badly that a study actually has to be pulled? The source mentions retractions.
It does, and it notes that publication retractions are actually increasing over time.
Why are they increasing? More bad science, or are we just better at catching it?
Probably a bit of both, but the common reasons cited are things like duplicated publication, plagiarism, and fraudulent data.
Okay, so the worst stuff.
Yeah, but here's the truly disturbing part highlighted by the review.
Oh.
Retracted articles, papers officially pulled, because they're flawed or fraudulent, continue to be cited frequently.
Cited after they've been retracted.
Yes. Even in other systematic reviews and clinical guidelines that doctors and policymakers rely on.
Wait, so bad science, stuff we know is wrong, is still floating around influencing current medical advice?
That's the implication. And the review points out that reassessing the science in those citing papers to account for the retracted study, that's rare. The bad data just keeps propagating.
That feels incredibly broken, like a zombie study infecting the literature.
It's a significant problem, yeah. It really undermines the entire edifice of evidence-based medicine when that happens.
So just to kind of wrap up the scope of the problems we've discussed, we're seeing issues pop up from the very beginning: design, ethical approval, consent challenges, recruitment issues.
Right, dealing with complex regulations, lack of funding or capacity, especially in developing countries.
Right through how the trial is run: protocol noncompliance, monitoring issues like maybe over-relying on expensive 100% data verification, actual errors in randomization.
Yeah, all the way through to the reporting stage, missing details on sample size, funding, authorship, DMCs, ethnicity data.
And even after publication, with these retracted papers still being cited, it's across the entire life cycle.
It really is. And what this all means, according to the review, is that the integrity landscape of RCTs, which is so vital for our health information, has really significant gaps, serious weaknesses.
So who's responsible for fixing this?
Well, the review strongly emphasizes that ensuring integrity isn't just one person's job or one group's. It requires high ethical standards and professionalism from everyone involved.
Everyone. Like who?
The organizations running the trials, the funders, the researchers themselves, publishers, journal editors, peer reviewers, and the broader community, including the public who relies on these findings. It takes a village, basically.
A village that needs to get its act together, it sounds like.
Well, the review points out that while many high-level principles for research integrity exist globally, things like the Hong Kong principles, the European Code, the Singapore Statement.
Right, those declarations.
Yeah. They often aren't specific or actionable enough for the complex realities of running and reporting on RCTs. They're good starting points, but maybe too general.
And that leads us to the review's conclusion then. What's the takeaway message?
The main conclusion and the call to action really stems from those two big findings. One, the widespread integrity issues in RCTs, and two, the low quality and inconsistency of the reviews summarizing those issues.
Okay.
So given that, the review states there's a clear, urgent need for international stakeholders, everyone we just mentioned, to come together.
To do what?
To develop specific, actionable standards that everyone can agree on and actually implement. Standards designed precisely to shore up RCT integrity across the board. A consensus effort. So wrapping it all up, we've taken this deep dive into an umbrella review that pretty much confirms that widespread sense of unease about the trustworthiness of clinical trials.
Yeah, it paints a worrying picture.
It really points to deep-seated issues across the entire life cycle of an RCT, from design and approval, through conduct and monitoring, to reporting, and even post-publication handling.
And maybe the most concerning part is that the evidence base summarizing these problems is often low quality itself.
Exactly, which makes getting a clear, complete picture really difficult.
So what does this all mean for you as someone listening, someone just trying to navigate health information and be well informed?
Well, I think it means that critically evaluating the source of any health claim is maybe more important than ever.
You can't just take headlines at face value.
Definitely not. You need to understand the potential for bias, especially thinking about who funded the study.
Right, following the money.
Yeah, and recognizing this complex web of factors we've talked about that can affect the integrity of clinical trials. It's not always straightforward.
So, the call from this review for a global consensus on clear, actionable standards, that feels like a really necessary, maybe overdue step.
Perhaps a crucial step, maybe, in starting to rebuild that confidence that seems to have been shaken.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope it gives you something important to consider the next time you encounter a new study or a health claim in the news.